So please join me in welcoming the first and the third CEOs of Microsoft, Satya Nadella and Bill Gates. As you heard, it's been quite a while since the Microsoft board has left the country. It was the last century when the board was last in another country, and as we discussed this morning, we've come a long ways. It's about 190 kilometers, but it's a big topic. All day, I know we're all talking about innovation and the like, and that's what we wanted to talk about here at lunch. Let me kick it off with a question to both of you. I mean, two individuals who've obviously spent your working lives focused on innovation. As you think about the elements that are needed to sustain innovation in an organization or in a community, what do you think matters most? Bill, you want to go first?
Well, I think innovation is actually accelerating not only in the digital space that Satya and I get to work in, but also more broadly, energy, biology, with all these digital tools. And so we can look and say, okay, what are the enabling factors? I think high quality education, great institutions of higher education are a key part of it. I think government funding for basic research, certainly if we go back to both the medical and the computer work, you can see very generous funding by the government has been very, very key. And then the policies that encourage startups, the kind of risk-taking, having venture capital type groups around. And so when you get all three of those things, good research funding, good universities, a lot of entrepreneurialism, you get some locations where you see kind of an explosion of activity. And that becomes somewhat self-sustaining once it gets going because you have a critical mass.
Yeah. I mean, I think Bill captured, what at a macro level at least is the way you create that explosion of innovation. I think a lot more from a micro, how does an organization have an environment in which innovation happens? And I think about these three things that happen. I mean, I look back even at Microsoft and places where we have had great successes when there's magic of new ideas or new concepts that we've had have matched up to our capability. That means we've built even new capability that can then allow us to pursue these new concepts. And then you have a culture that doesn't fight the new capability or doesn't fight the new concept. I mean, I think about even how the HoloLens came about. It's that magic of those three things falling into gear. And it's true for companies like ours, but it's also true for, I think, entire regions. And you gotta always keep looking for those new capabilities that allow you to get to new concepts, and then you gotta have a culture that fosters it.
Bill, when you started Microsoft, obviously it was a time of the birth of the microprocessor, the PC industry, software in new ways. And yet you're connected to so many technologies today. As you look to the next decade, what do you think are the tech trends that are going to be most important?
Well, it is amazing how the digital revolution is creating kind of a foundation to impact many other areas. So the digital revolution should lead to breakthroughs in education, that the way you interact, the way that you share. Now, that's moving a bit slowly, but I see huge potential there. And then, of course, if you make education better, that feeds every area of endeavor. In health, all the wonderful tools being generated now where they can measure things in a super sensitive way and record all this information and see patterns. If you didn't have the digital revolution, you couldn't take even just the genomics data, not to mention the proteomic and other omic type data. You couldn't store it. It would be way, way too expensive to do. And so we're seeing this incredible set of breakthroughs in biologies, whether it's specifically in infectious disease, where our foundation does a lot of work, or in cancer, where we don't, but a lot of amazing things are happening. Energy is one where it's less easy to prove that something will happen, but the importance, the value of something happening that makes energy cheap and makes it totally clean, we kind of need it there. And so priming the pump there with the rules, the incentives, the basic research will be fairly important. Something like robotics, touches a lot of different activities, and you could say that's coming out of the pure digital realm, but then, security, manufacturing, transport, it gets to be very, very broad.
As we think about innovation in all of these spaces, Satya, one of the things you mentioned earlier was culture. You've been obviously very focused on shaping Microsoft's culture to further encourage innovation. How do you change a culture to do that?
Yeah, I think a lot about culture. And, when, as a business leader in a tech company, when I think about what is the real indicator of long-term success, you kind of come to what's the innovation culture of the place. That's a better indicator than any one specific product effort that you may have at any given time, because you got to sustain that innovation. And thinking about that, I even and you can't be static. So that means you have to be in this quest to create that ideal learning organization. So I said, well, how does one get inspired to look at learning organizations, or what's even the metaphor that we should have for talking about culture? And I was inspired by some of the work that Carol Dweck at Stanford did in child psychology. And she basically has the simplest concept there is that if you have somebody who's a know-it-all and there's a learn-it-all, the chances are that the learn-it-all will trump the know-it-all. And if that applies to boys and girls in school, it applies to CEOs like me, and it applies to everyone inside of Microsoft. And the other thing I like about that cultural metaphor is it puts the onus on every individual, right? Because most people sit around inside of organizations and say, hey, I don't have a culture problem, it's that other team, it's the other person. But the reality is, it's each one of us individually, are we really confronting, in fact, our fixed mindset? And that's what I seek. And starting with me, I just can't preach about this. I've got to be able to confront it myself. It's like, wow, I should have done better there. And if I can be vulnerable and I can demonstrate that, and I think that that's a culture that we need at Microsoft, and that's what we aspire to.
If we think about an ideal learning organization, I can't help but think of a university. You both have referred to universities. I think we're very fortunate in this part of North America to have some great universities. Do you think the public here fully appreciates the role that universities are playing in innovation today? Do you think that there's additional ways we should try to bring that message to the public? What should we be talking to the public about?
Well, all these government budgets have a challenge in that if you have healthcare costs going up significantly, then the other parts of the budget get pushed. And governments see that with their current employees, their retired employees, in the case of the U.S., the prisoners are a big cost. So it's been tough to maintain the level of commitment to the state universities. I think British Columbia's done better at that than most of the states in the United States. But in order to have that remain a priority, I do think we're going to have to talk more about the knock-on effects. And that's why things like the technology alliances that get done, that go out and spread that message, the companies themselves, both being philanthropically strong supporters, the company and their employees, to set a good example that, yes, these universities, it's part of this virtuous cycle that the research starts there and then either goes to startups or the big companies. And that's why it is no coincidence that if you look at high-tech jobs in a location, there's a strong, very strong correlation to where you have very high-quality universities.
Satya, if you look at what we're doing inside Microsoft today, whether it's on natural languages or artificial intelligence or computer vision, we're not necessarily doing it by ourselves. How do you think about partnerships with universities in these?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. When I think about even the history of, say, a breakthrough like Skype Translate. And this is pretty a magical thing where we now have the ability for two people on Skype to be able to talk two different languages and have it automatically translated for you. And it was the coming together of speech recognition, speech synthesis, and machine translation with a deep neural net and Skype data. But then you say, well, it happened in 2015, but the history of it, you can in fact go back to some of the, the government grants on after the Second World War and the continuous progress. But even our own work at Microsoft, for example, was a lot of research we did in Microsoft Research with some universities around speech recognition in the mid-90s. Machine translation was another stream that, in fact, borrowed from, again, fundamental research in universities and Microsoft Research. So I'm a big believer in having government participate, universities do their work. We, as perhaps now the biggest lab outside of universities and government with Microsoft Research, doing fundamental research, and we are very committed to. We have a particular percentage of our R&D that we pour every year into fundamental research, and our Microsoft Research folks are publishing all of that. We are probably one of the most active contributors to that body of research. And then, of course, we commercialize it as well. But that level of commitment to core research and partnerships with universities is very important. And even just this morning, I was reading the article about some of the breakthroughs in cancer research through essentially computational modeling that we have because of work we're doing in Cambridge. We did this summer some fascinating work with the University of Washington, where we're starting to use synthetic strands of DNA as a storage mechanism for that explosion of data we have. Those are research projects today, and they will be products of tomorrow, either from us or, as Bill mentioned, from others who are the entrepreneurs in the region. And I think of that continuum, that long view, is what's needed.
There have been a lot of companies in the tech sector that have been very successful, but have not done what you just described, Satya, this investment in basic research. Bill, that was obviously your vision. It was your decision. Can you describe a little bit about what led you to invest in this way and why you think you made this bet and many others have not?
Well, Microsoft had a grand view of where it wanted to go. And so whether it was thinking about, okay, we want to be a global company and really building up employees and learning how to do business everywhere, or thinking about having many products, not just being a single product company, which many software companies are, or about renewing the technologies, the software technologies, we benefited immensely from work that governments had funded. Satya mentioned speech recognition, speech understanding. We benefited from other corporate labs, the most famous of which is Xerox PARC with their Alto, which was the first sort of bitmap graphics terminal. Then, of course, the AT&T labs not only did Unix, they did basic semiconductor work. The IBM labs over time have made contributions to the field. And so we thought, boy, we better be inventing some of this stuff, not just benefiting from what other people have done. And as we got large enough and we could afford it, we went out to the universities and got very top people. And that became self-perpetuating. And just to show you how close this investment was to universities, we had a goal to have about 30% of all people doing computer science graduate degrees come through and either visit or be a fellow in one of our key centers, so that we wouldn't just be doing our own work, we'd also be seeing the amazing variety of work that goes on in different locations. And that Microsoft Research investment has paid off very, very strongly. When we had to figure out, okay, how did we do Bing is this great search engine which Satya was managing, he used the strength of Microsoft Research, and they were super enthused about it, to allow us to catch up and do some breakthrough work. So it really has paid off.
Yeah, and I think in a way that perhaps most people wouldn't be aware, you can go to a lot of major universities, you'll find in the computer science department between the faculty and the postdoc fellows, maybe 75, 80 PhDs. Microsoft research worldwide, we have over 800 PhDs just in the computer science field. Now, of course, that's the pinnacle of education. We live in a world where what we're finding, I think, is that STEM education matters more and to more people. Satya, Bill, you've both been focused on this. How do you think about how we address those challenges societally?
I think STEM education, especially if you look at where is innovation happening, where is job growth, where are the skills gap, is sort of an existential priority for every region in the world. And I've had the chance to visit around 25 countries in the last 12 months, and every place I go, everyone's having, is the topic of conversation is all about, if this fourth industrial revolution is going to happen, how are we going to participate in it? And then what's the skills that we need to acquire in order to participate in it fully? So this is super important. To me, one of the things that we do need to define is a little bit of, not just narrowly look at it as everybody needs to become a coder in the computer science as defined today, but what is computational thinking that is important in every walk of life? So that's, I think, we've got to frame it broadly, get a very diverse set of people, boys and girls, every ethnicity interested in this. And that means we've got, like, for example, in our case, one of the biggest gaps we're going to have in achieving anything that we aspire to do in STEM education is going to be qualified teachers. And one way to bridge that is a program we came up with called TEALS, which is about taking volunteers from the industry, because that's where the expertise lies today. Because it's going to take us 10 years probably to get the qualified teachers in every elementary school to teach computational thinking. So how do we bridge that? By getting the industry experts to volunteer their time. And so now we're doing that, I know, in many, many parts of the United States, and we would love to, of course, expand. We'd also put a grant in place for this computational thinking of $75 million to just really get that to be more accessible. And creating opportunity scholarships, which we've done in the Washington state, so that people from the minorities can get access to top-class education. So I think it's going to take a multi-pronged approach, but I think every government leader and every industry leader, because both of us have interest in it, we need the skills, and we have to take a long view in making sure that those skills are being developed from an early age.
Bill, there's probably very few people that have had the opportunity to spend the kind of energy that you and Melinda have at the Foundation on education. As you think about these needs, these opportunities, you think about them in the STEM space, what's the learning that you take away that you think we need to think about?
Well, the tools that are out there for the motivated learner today are dramatically better than what's ever been out there before. So, between interactive experimental software,
Minecraft,
good old Minecraft, lectures that are free. So for that motivated student, this is an unbelievable time. And yet, getting people to, in a sustained way, want to learn these complex topics, that really means we need to get to them in a different way, and we need to improve the average quality of teaching. And those have proven more difficult, the motivational pieces and the teaching piece. For example, in computer science, we peaked like 20 years ago with about 34% of people getting the STEM degrees were women. Now we're back down at like 18%. So the absolute number stayed the same when the number of males has gone up very dramatically. And even understanding where did we make it daunting, where did we make it discouraging culturally or content-wise, there's immense amount of work going into that, but it's unsolved. So I think with the magic of software to engage students and help teachers personalize their activities more, we should see a breakthrough in education. But as yet, if we take math scores, reading scores, particularly of the lower income groups in the US and Canada, we haven't seen that much of a move. So it's still a work in progress. And anything that involves the personnel system, where you're trying to transfer best practices from one teacher to another, it is fairly slow, and there's even some pushback for the status quo in getting those things done. So we're very committed to it, but compared to the progress we've made on our disease and health work, we've achieved less of our goals in education.
You're both describing a set of issues and challenges that are universal. They're global. Satya, as you said, you've seen it in 25 countries. Just a couple of months ago, we had the Worldwide Partner Conference for Microsoft in Toronto. We're in the other part of Canada. Jeff Immelt from GE was with you. You two talked about this time in which we live, this age of globalization, but also a year where there's a lot of talk about local pressures and the like. What do you think is the role for companies navigating this kind of environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think about that quite a bit because, first of all, one of the things that I think makes Microsoft very, very unique. I mean, think about this. I wouldn't be a CEO of Microsoft if it was not for the democratizing force of Microsoft technology reaching me where I was growing up. And I think, wow, what was that? Like, what caused a multinational company to create the kind of products, have the kind of go-to-market approaches that made things accessible to a middle-class kid growing up in India, and then giving me the opportunity. And then how do I reflect on that today? And that, I think, at least is what every one of us who is a multinational company needs to think about. Are we creating local opportunity? Is there a local impact? Of course, in our case, we need to bring some global leverage, global expertise. But ultimately, we've got to measure our long-term sustainability by what's the local employment opportunity, what's the local entrepreneurial energy we were able to sort of create because of what we do. And to me, that I think ultimately is what the role of a multinational company is, to have a long-term business. Whenever I visit a country, I do these roundtables, and I meet with who are all of the partners we have, who are taking some of our platforms into public sector, who are taking it to small businesses, because every country cares about the productivity of their small businesses, and the only way their small businesses are going to get productive in non-linear ways is through adoption of digital technology. It's not going to happen just because of all the work we do. It happens because of a thriving ecosystem we build. And that level of building out, for every dollar we make, the fact that there's $4, $5, even $10 in the ecosystem that's local, creating jobs and employment, is core to the business design that Bill and team designed from the get-go, and it still sustains us. And I believe that's the only way for multinational companies, because if you're just participating in countries and all you do is extract rent, that's not sustainable. You got to create local opportunity.
Bill, that connects with things that you've talked about over the years. You've talked about creative capitalism and other similar efforts. In an era of globalization, of great technological change, how do we ensure that society benefits broadly?
Well, I think there's a little bit of a surprise this year for people who take it for granted that the voters and the population as a whole understands that globalization has had these huge benefits of speeding up innovation and causing product prices to be far lower than they would be otherwise, that we take that for granted, and other people see some of the drawbacks, which of course you might be able to manage the displacements caused by globalization even better than you do today. But the fact that people net see it as a bad thing, and that a vote like a Brexit vote or some other votes are sort of a move, hey, we don't like change. We want to set back the clock. We want to be more local in our thinking. That's a huge concern, because the assumption and the amazing things that can get done in areas like IT and health have all been predicated on it continuing to be a totally global market where the best ideas are shared everywhere and companies can work very, very broadly. So I think we do need to step back and say, are we doing enough in communities? Are people seeing these benefits? I'm still absorbing this and thinking, okay, what are the lessons that come out of it? Because both Microsoft and my foundation are really predicated on huge amount of cooperation between all the different countries of the world and a pretty strong alignment on how we do things.
You both obviously spend a lot of time traveling the world. You've referred to that. This day, this conference this week is about the opportunities we have in this part of the world. Any sort of concluding thoughts on what you see as you return home from these trips and what you see as the big opportunities here for all of us in this room?
I'm very, very excited about the work we're doing in Vancouver. I had a chance, and I think even this afternoon, some of our board members will have more of a chance to even interact with the work we're doing in Vancouver. And when I think about that, it's the human capital of this region that is going to make a fundamental impact in terms of what Microsoft's future is. In fact, they're working on HoloLens. They're working on Skype for Business. They're obviously building some great games for us. And I look at the variety of projects, the kind of vibrancy we have in terms of being able to not only capitalize on the talent that's already here, but also bring in new talent to the region. I couldn't be more excited. And now, the University of British Columbia, we would love to be able to build the type of partnership that we've had with the University of Washington, between the work that's happening here and the university, and then between the two universities themselves. So I think that this dialogue that this conference represents is great timing, it's great for us, and I think it's great for the region.
Yeah, I had a chance on Friday and Saturday to be back in Montreal, where Canada generously hosted a replenishment for a big global health group called Global Fund. And Prime Minister Trudeau participated in that. And I got to talk to him about how, I think Canada is very well positioned. It's got good, strong universities, good policies, certainly more enlightened immigration policies than most countries have, which is a real asset. And that event was successful, and it really did represent something very similar to what we're talking about here, which is that he as a leader wants to remind people about openness and taking in refugees in an appropriate way. And he wanted actually to be here today, but he's got the opportunity to give his first speech as Prime Minister at the UN General Assembly. And so, I think specifically Washington, British Columbia is a real opportunity, but Canada as a whole can be an exemplar of the kind of values and investments that I think will drive innovation and help us all benefit from it.
Well, thanks to both of you. I know all three of us, the board, the executive team from Microsoft, we're all really grateful that everyone's come together today. We're really grateful for the Business Council of British Columbia, the Washington Roundtable, the Greater Seattle Chamber of Commerce, the Washington Technology Industry Association, and Challenge Seattle. It's really those 5 groups that have put all of this together. So thanks to each of them. Please join me in thanking these 2 individuals for spending some time with us together.
Thank you for watching the video. Please register the channel and press the bell to be able to view your latest videos.